Welcome, Network for New Music audiences. Today we have a special interview with composer Caleb Burhans, whose piece Time Well Spent is going to be featured on our next concert on Saturday, December 12th at 7:30 p.m. online. Welcome, Caleb.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
It's excellent to have you, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I wanted to start with just a general introduction to our audiences because you've had a rather eclectic upbringing as a musician, first as a boy soprano, and then your violin piano lessons, and then on to, you said electric bass. So could you sort of just give us an introduction to yourself and how it includes eclecticism as part of that?
Well, gosh, I guess the most important thing for me is that I came to classical music in a kind of roundabout way because my father played a lot of rock and roll and backed up people such as like Ray Charles and the Everly Brothers before I was born. And so I grew up mostly knowing that music, and I kind of stumbled into classical music as a boy soprano as it happened. And I had a friend that played the violin in that group, and so I went on to start studying violin and things beyond that. And I kept singing in choirs throughout my entire life and playing in string quartets and orchestra. And then, like you said, I started playing electric bass only a couple of years after the violin. And I started playing in bands, all kinds of music ranging from like punk to ambient music. And so all throughout the years, I've kind of weaved all of these influences as a performer into what I do with my own music. So oftentimes you'll have like a choral work, but it has a taste of some electronics in there and things like that, even though it might just be for organ and women's choir. And a lot of what I do kind of weaves in a lot of this idea of like early music in the same kind of, I guess, language or sound world more so, of what people do with early music and a lot of what's done with new music, and then all in between is romantic music as well. So I don't know, I definitely, I have one foot in this and that, and I kind of bring it all together when I have to write music and try and do the best with who I am on a given daily basis.
So Caleb, I've heard you mentioned that you said that the time you spend as a singer affected how you write musics. And I wanted to explore sort of both sides of that. One, the first side of it is the singing part of it, and the second is that sort of music in its plurality.
Yeah, I find that vocal music has always led everything that I do, and I mainly worked as a violinist and violist now. But I find that even when I write for instruments purely, it's always there's a vocal element to that, and so much music speaks across genres in terms of whatever that is, and the voice lends itself to many different instrumental writings and things like that. I mean, we go back to vocalises and all these things. So I don't know. I find myself kind of tracing across all those different places.
And I wanted to mention that voice part, and I because the voice plays a role in Time Well Spent. So could you sort of give us a little, maybe an introduction to that work and the role of the voice in that?
Sure. In Time Well Spent, it's a marimba piece, essentially, but the marimba player has to sing. And this is due to the fact that I wrote it for a friend of mine who was looking for a piece for his senior recital, who's a very adventurous percussionist named Jonathan Shapiro, who's now based over in Germany. And he's also a wonderful singer, and he's just, when he performs, you get his whole character, and it's a wonderful thing to see. So I wanted to highlight that. And at the same time, I wanted to write something that both is in the range of a female and male singer. So I stuck it right around the same range that both men and women can sing in. And when writing this piece, I was very influenced at the time by this band called Pechora. And the bass player for that group wrote a song. His name's Skuli Sverrisson, and he wrote this beautiful song called Drifting. And I was very influenced by this very simple pattern in 7 that kind of keeps sloping around. And so I started thinking about this very simple pattern, and I came up with this idea for this very simple thing, this very primitive process of piece. And the idea of time being well spent is kind of a joke in a very nerdy musical sense, that there is a very famous piece for solo marimba by a composer named Miki, and it's called Time for Marimba. And the way it's laid out on the page looks like Time for Marimba. And I just always thought that was a little silly thing, so I thought Time Well Spent for Marimba would be this piece for Jonathan's recital.
Excellent. You mentioned when we were talking about your background, that I heard in a previous interview that you were thinking of sort of the standard paradigm of a composer is one who performs music and composes music. It really does music in all of its capacities. And that certainly applies to you and your work in from performing to composing to even organizing concerts. You also mentioned that you enjoy playing in a chamber music setting, that you sort of consider yourself a cog in the small wheel in the sense of chamber music. Could you talk more about that sort of experience in making music, both performing it and combining it with composition?
Sure. Well, because I do have this deep eclectic love of many different styles of music, not only have I played in many groups that are chamber groups like American Contemporary Music Ensemble and Alarm Will Sound over many years, which primarily do contemporary classical music. But I've also played in a lot of other groups that play like disco, such as this band called Escort, which I just finished tracking some strings for the other day. And I'm also concertmaster of the show Mean Girls on Broadway. And just, I love learning new things about every little aspect of what I do. Like for instance, like playing on Broadway is that much more enhanced from having played years and years of contemporary music, because I've thought a lot about how we tune things, and most people don't spend time thinking about how we tune a third and are we doing it as a fifth partial and things like this. But I do, and so I understand in context where we can and can't do that on Broadway and things like that. Probably a lot of people aren't thinking that deep into it, but I enjoy it as there's this lattice work, and it's all music just comes together, and one thing can teach you about another thing. And so I enjoy that deeply as a performer. And then when I come to it as a composer, I find when someone commissions me, I find what that person is looking for, not only within their instrument, whatever they play or what they sing, but also what they're looking for within themselves. And hopefully I can create something that connects with them on an emotional level, or something that speaks to them and makes them feel confident about what they do with their music.
Yeah, and I was wondering if you could speak more about the emotional element, because you bring up a lot about how music is sort of a really emotional for you. And if you could tell us a little bit about how you write music with a guitar, with a string, with a piano, with a computer.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, music for me has become very cathartic over the years. I found myself becoming very self-reflective very early on, just because my father passed away at an early age. And rather than seeking help professionally, I found that what did I have to do? I could write music. And so for a long time, that was where I found solace. And so that has been my outlet for a lot of my struggles throughout my years. But in addition to that, it's also been a place where I can find great joy and go back and visit the past, and also look forward to the future and find my way.
Excellent. And maybe as just a last question for you is, while we're featuring this piece, Time Well Spent, I've noticed your other pieces is sort of a meditation on time, because you have a piece called In a Space Between Time, and Time to Spare, and In a Time of Desperation. Could you talk to us about that interest in time?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm fascinated with the idea of time, in that as a composer or musician at all, like that is our canvas, if you're thinking about it in terms of art. And I was struck years ago when I visited the Van Gogh Museum and walked around. We didn't take much time because we were on tour, and so we only had a few hours, and so we went through it very quickly. And I think they contain something like 75% of his art there. And to think that I could see that much of one person's art in that much time, granted not really take it in, but just to see it was very interesting in terms of thinking about somebody like, how much music did Mozart write? How long would it take to sit down and then listen to all of that? Oh, because time is our canvas. And so very early on, I was thinking a lot about like early music of like Philip Glass and this kind of process music, and how that our perception changes, especially when we're performing music. Performers can often feel this distorted sense of time, much as sports players can. Like when they're right in the moment, things can feel like they slow down. And so I've actually written pieces about time being distorted and slowing down. And so I just like the idea and the notion of time as not only as a backdrop, but also as just a concept and something that we have to face as musicians every day.
And given that, could you tell us what you've been doing in these times of quarantine, and also what are you working on now?
Sure. I did write a piece for soprano saxophone and piano that was about dreams and anxiety right at the beginning of the lockdown and everything. And since then, I've mostly been working on smaller recording projects from home for various groups that I work with, but otherwise working on other small projects and possibly working on an oboe quartet coming up soon. I wrote one about a year and a half ago for oboe and string trio, and it's possible I might be writing another one coming up.
Well, that's great, Caleb. Thank you so much for taking this time to spend with us for this interview. And we're really looking forward to featuring you and Time Well Spent on our concert.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Caleb.